Let's talk for a few minutes about the what we know about the ceasefire in Gaza, politically, diplomatically. Steve Witkoff, I believe, is in the region. It was very unclear up until about a day or two ago whether he was going to come back and try and restart negotiations for phase two, which is already, I think, more than a month late. Um, John, what do we know about where the negotiations are right now? What does we talked about like the no man's land of the ceasefire right now. Where situate us? What do we know?
He did a flyby. He did
Mm,
a very short visit. He proposed a 50-day extension of the ceasefire, during which Qassam would release prisoners for nothing, and the ceasefire and siege would continue. So I don't see much coming out of that. I don't see at this point Qassam changing their fundamental principles and handing over soldiers in exchange for um, the ceasefire extension, such as it is. Um, I don't think that's going to happen. So I feel, uh, yeah, I don't think that there's going to be a Witkoff riding in on his horse and saving the ceasefire. The reason that worked once was because there was an already negotiated agreement that he could refer back to and say, sign this agreement that has 78 technical pages that took 3 months to negotiate with 50 technical negotiators. That doesn't exist right now. The sides need to sit face to face, and they need to have technical negotiations about numbers of prisoners, about what the withdrawal is going to look like. Israel has to concede on withdrawing from Gaza, which they're refusing to do. They're not out of the Philadelphia corridor, which they're supposed to be phase one. So they're violating phase one.
they're
Uh,
violating everything
they're
of it.
violating
Yeah,
it
yeah,
structurally.
yeah.
I don't s I don't wanna speculate, but I don't see, a Witkoff, saving the day on this one. There was a deal before that was in place that he forced the sides to accept when they had already, at one point, both accepted it. That doesn't exist for phase two, and phase two is complicated. There's a
Mm.
number of living soldiers that are very valuable in exchange for Palestinian political prisoners. And I don't see the Palestinian resistance conceding that.
Mm.
On the other hand, John, um, you may be right about that. I hope you're not, and I hope there is a deal to advance this, which is what
I
people in
do
Gaza
too.
need.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it seems like the US is still interested in a deal. Israel may be interested in going back to war, or at least extending the current phase of starving Gaza, genocide by starvation. They may want to continue that indefinitely. But it does seem that there is some US frustration at the Israeli approach, and we've seen that playing out over the past few days, with the issue of the direct US Hamas talks that we talked about last week, and more information has come out about that. And that includes an interview on CNN with Jake Tapper, with Adam Bola, who is the Trump envoy for hostage negotiations. And he spoke to Jake Tapper about why the US decided to talk to Hamas. And we can watch a very short clip of that.
And why Netanyahu, Dermer, others might be upset.
I do understand. I spoke with Ron, and I'm sympathetic. He has someone that he doesn't know well, making direct contact with Hamas. Maybe I would see them and say, look, they don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys. So he doesn't know me, and there are big stakes. He lives in a country where if it sets certain precedents, then it will hurt or help a lot of other people. So I understand the consternation and the concern, and I wasn't upset. At the same time, we're the United States. We're not an agent of Israel. We have specific interests at play.
With the
He
United
could get
States.
deported for that, right?
Right,
Or
right.
fired.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll get to that. He says we're the United States, we're not agents of Israel. That interview appears to have gotten him into hot water for a couple of reasons. One, suggesting that Hamas are pretty nice guys, or just normal
Regular guys.
human beings,
Yeah.
you know, that they don't have horns on their heads. And us, there are reports going around this morning that following that interview, he's been sort of sidelined, not necessarily fired, but sidelined. And we see this report in the Times of Israel that says U.S. hostage envoy Adam Boehler will continue assisting Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, a senior U.S. official tells the Times of Israel, following reports that Boehler has been sidelined from the Israel file amid frustrations in Jerusalem with his decision to hold unprecedented secret talks with Hamas. And so he was mentioning in that interview with Jake Tapper how he was saying, he mentioned Ron Dermer. Ron Dermer is the ex-American who serves as a senior advisor, I think national security advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu. And so Israel is obviously very upset with the US-Israel direct talks. And we learned a little bit more, and I'll say a bit more about that, but we learned a little bit more about those talks themselves from Tamer al-Mishal of Al Jazeera. Over the weekend, he did some reporting where he gave some detail. This was on Al Jazeera Arabic about what happened. And I'll outline very briefly what he said. He said that 4 meetings took place in Doha between Hamas and the US envoy, Adam Boehler, over the previous week. 2 were with high-level Hamas officials headed by Khalil al-Hayya, Hamas's chief negotiator and its Gaza leader. The goal was to achieve a deal to release 5 Americans. This included 4 bodies and 1 living person, the Israeli-American soldier Edan Alexander, the last living American known to be among the captives in Gaza. There were also talks about what Hamas would get in exchange. Hamas asked for 250 Palestinians to be released, 100 of them with life sentences and 150 with long sentences. And Boehler, or the US side, supposedly accepted this, but then Israel insisted on having a veto over 50 of the names. Hamas said they would allow a veto over only 10 of the names. Boehler was apparently trying to get this deal done in order for Trump to announce it at his State of the Union address, which was a week ago on Tuesday. But before the last meeting with Hamas, the press leaks began about the talks, both from Israeli and American sources. And so in that final meeting with Hamas, after those leaks, Boehler backed off everything that had already been agreed and said that Trump himself had decided that there could be nothing given in exchange and Hamas just had to release the prisoners. Hamas replied that that was not going to happen without an exchange. And after this final meeting, Trump came out with that really horrific tweet, essentially threatening people in Gaza with genocide. And that's where the talks ended. And Tamer al-Mishal stressed, and again, he's speaking to people with direct knowledge, presumably from Hamas, those talks, that request for those talks were initiated by the US side. And that has caused this behind-the-scenes tension between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration. And it seems like the Trump administration is backing off and bowing to the Netanyahu administration, at least up to a point. and it's being reported by Axios and by other outlets that Marco Rubio told reporters that the US-Hamas talks were a one-off and that they came to nothing, that they hadn't borne fruit. The suggestion there is that now the US will not deal directly with Hamas. But it is interesting that Haaretz reported, and we could show this story, Tamara, on March 9th, written by Chaim Levinson with the headline, "Fed up with Netanyahu's time wasting, Trump has cut him out of ceasefire talks." And it reads that Trump has grown tired of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stalling in the negotiations with Hamas. First, the Trump administration cut out the Israeli government from the talks and spoke directly with Hamas. Now they are also trying to cut out the middleman and speak directly to the Israeli public. So that's the context then. And finally today, as John mentioned, Witkoff himself in Doha presented an updated US proposal for extending the Gaza ceasefire deal by several weeks in return for additional hostage releases by Hamas and the resumption in humanitarian aid to Gaza. 4 sources with direct knowledge tell Axios. And even if John is skeptical, and perhaps rightly so, about whether that will come to anything, I think it's significant the fact that Witkoff went there and made that proposal itself tells us that the US, at least for now, is not in a rush to make good on those threats from Trump and indeed from Israel.
Yeah, I don't see the Qassam brigades releasing Israeli soldiers for temporary humanitarian assistance that is internationally mandated responsibility. I just don't see that. We've watched them negotiate prisoner exchanges for many, many years. It was 5 years of the Gilad Shalit exchange that we watched happen. We watched the negotiations this time. I don't see that happening. The strangulation of Gaza is not going to get prisoners back. Qassam has been very clear on what it will take to get the prisoners, the Israeli prisoners of war, the soldiers out of Gaza. And it's going to be thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And those prisoners have to be negotiated on. And then the deal has to go back and forth like this deal, the example that you just said. Israel wants to take names off the list. So then they take names off the list. They need to go back and forth, face to face with mediators for days over these technical details. They need to get maps that show where Israel's going to withdraw from under this agreement, because this is the only thing that Qassam has to reach justice in this deal. That's the only thing they have. If they give back the soldiers for nothing, they're going to be living under siege, under the conditions that Israel imposes, with Israeli soldiers inside Gaza. They're just not going to do that. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think that's realistic assessment. All I've got to say is that I hope Steve Witkoff and his team have a good security detail, because you can pretty much guarantee that the Israelis are spying on them regularly.
Well, he left. He went to Russia, to the Ukraine. He was in Doha for like measured in minutes. It wasn't measured in days. So,
well, the fact that he went at all, though, is interesting, because it means they're still willing to put some muscle and prestige on the line for this. And I mean, it's very difficult to know what to predict, because what they say is very different from what they end up doing. I suppose a key measure, and this is probably the most urgent and important, is that there's no sign that they've put pressure on Israel to end its genocidal starvation siege on Gaza. The Trump administration seems quite happy to let that continue, just as the Biden administration did.
Right.
The difference being that the Biden administration pretended to care.
yeah, and put
pretended to be
mechanisms
making
and
efforts.
things. There's
Yeah.
nothing like that from Trump.
Yeah.
so
Trump
far.
Trump doesn't pretend. So that's the difference there, and where it will go, who knows? But at the same time, all we can say is we have to keep the pressure up in every way that we can, because it's not on the front pages, the fact that 2 million people are being deliberately starved to death again and bombed. There have been lethal Israeli bombing attacks in Gaza almost every day the past few days, including an attack in central Gaza today. And of course, Israel is bombing all over the place. They bombed Syria again today. So Israel is acting with complete impunity, and it's up to us to keep the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people in Gaza, front and center.
Yeah, as our friend Rifat Al-Arir said, a ceasefire is when we cease and Israel fires. And that seems to be a historic, I mean, this is just a continuation of what Israel is allowed to get away with. Right now, it's everything and anything.
Qassem's principles to end the war are clear. End the aggression,
Yeah.
withdraw from Gaza, exchange prisoners, and end the siege. I don't see them giving in on any of those.
No. Why would they? And I mean, the blockade, as we've been saying, the blockade is mandated. It's not a goalpost that is able to be moved. Israel doesn't get to just set new terms when it has agreed to the terms that it agreed to. So it remains to be seen how the ceasefire will be enforced, besides the Yemeni armed forces and Ansar Allah doing their part. But it's depressing. It's really depressing. It's enraging that Israel is once again being allowed to do what it wants with full impunity and full participation and encouragement by the West. It's depraved.
Where's Egypt? Egypt could open the Rafah crossing.
They sure could.
Well, the Israelis are at the so-called Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt and Gaza, which is a border purely between Palestine and Egypt.
Yeah.
And the Egyptians could move in there if they wanted to, with enough force that they wouldn't have to fire a shot, assuming that they didn't want to engage the Israelis directly. They could force an Israeli withdrawal. It would be a major, historic, and unprecedented move, but it would be entirely justified, because we're talking about not just restoring Egyptian sovereignty over Egypt's own border, but moving to end a genocide.
Yeah.
And a deal that was agreed upon between Israel and Egypt.
And enforce a deal
that
was agreed upon, and that is endorsed and backed by the whole Arab League and by the United States.
The United States, to the tune of tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So or where's these offshore power ships that Turkey and Indonesia, other countries have? Solutions need to be thought of outside of the paradigm of impossibility that is overtaken the international community.
Well, at the same time, the U.S. does things, the Trump administration, I'm talking about both domestically and politically, does things that were supposedly unthinkable. And they get away with a lot of them. There's pushback on some, they back off on some, but they also achieve their goals on others, because they act, they do things people don't expect. And, there's nothing stopping the rest of the world doing that and saying, we're just going to open the border. We're going to gather our ships, our humanitarian ships. We're going to gather our convoys of doctors and aid, and we're going to enter Gaza. And Egypt can say, we're going to guarantee the safety of these people as they pass through our border with Palestine to provide relief and will provide enough force. I'm not saying they should attack the Israelis. They should simply enter the border with enough force that the Israelis will not be able to stop them. Can Israel move a brigade or a division into the Philadelphia crossing to stop Egypt doing that? I don't think so. I mean, maybe I'm going beyond what I know, but I'm saying that surely Egypt and the Arab world and other countries have the resources to do that if they put their mind to it. We've seen countries mobilize billions of dollars for other goals in the region or to fight other wars. And we're not even saying fight a war here. We're saying carry out a true humanitarian intervention in the sense of saying we're going to move this aid and doctors and medical teams and
during a U.S. guaranteed ceasefire.
Yeah.
What is happening?
We're going to bring it in. We're going to bring it in. Israel isn't doing it. I mean, and Israel doesn't provide this. Israel does. That's a misapprehension that you often see. Israel doesn't provide the aid. They don't even provide the electricity that they're cutting off.
No.
They sell it.
Yeah.
Palestinians have to pay for it. And this electricity, people in Gaza, ordinary people, have not had electricity for a very long time. This electricity, this remaining electricity that's going in, is to operate the desalination plants so that there is some fresh water supply in Gaza. And that's what Israel is cutting off. So when they say we're cutting off electricity, what they're actually saying is we're cutting off water. We're cutting off water.
In public, in broad daylight, as they say, just as they've done for the last 80 years. Well, obviously, so much more to talk about, but maybe we'll leave it there.